Dr. Chris Phelps is a general dentist with two successful practices in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's a certified trainer in the Cialdini method of influence, author and owner of Call Tracker ROI. This is a very short, humble little statement that Dr. Phelps gave to me to introduce him. But I've been on many of his webinars. I've studied much of his material, and it's just fantastic. He's got a wonderful call tracking program, some fantastic statistics that he's provided. All-star, very grateful. His principles of influence that you're going to learn today are just phenomenal, and he's a great practitioner, great reputation, a philanthropist, as well as the president of the Nova Southeastern University Alumni Association, which is very close to where I live, across the street. And so he's always helping young dentists grow and seasoned dentists go to the next level. So with that little extra introduction, Dr. Chris Phelps.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Always a pleasure. I always enjoy our time together. And I appreciate you inviting me on for the series tonight. So I'm excited to introduce everybody to some of the principles of Dr. Robert Cialdini. And as Alex says, for anybody that's heard me in previous webinars, I will talk all night if you'll let me. But unfortunately, we don't have that much time. So I've got to turn on my lightning fast speed here and get you through a nice little introductory into the science of influence. And why is this important? And why is the research and teachings of Dr. Cialdini important? And why has it been important in my life and my practice? Well, because this stuff is based in science, as Alex said, we're not really in the sales business. We're into the case presentation business, right? The education business. And because Cialdini's principles are based in science, what I'm hoping that you'll see from this tonight is that there's an ethical way we can use these tested, proven principles, okay, that are based in research, right, to set the stage for more people to say yes to whatever the request we're going to ask them. Not to guarantee a yes, right, but just set the stage that if we use these principles, more people will say yes to the things we ask of them than if we don't use them. And it's as simple as that. And for some people, you'll see small changes in your business, and for other people, you'll see dynamic changes in your business, which is why it excites me. Again, that's kind of the things I saw in my practice. And for those of you that don't know who Dr. Cialdini is, well, he's written several books, and most of your major business magazines have listed his books as some of the top 10 books of all time when it comes to business. He's professor of emeritus in psychology and marketing at Arizona State University, and today has been the most cited social psychologist alive today. And his book, as you can see up here, is a couple of them have all been New York Times bestsellers. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Cialdini about 3 years ago and training under him in his research and how to bring these things to dentistry. And part of what my strength has always been is trying to figure out when I hear these great concepts and ideas, and then trying to figure out, well, what does that mean for my practice, and how can I use that in my business to take it to another level? So I hope you enjoy some of the things I've come up with and how I use them in my practice and how I think you can use them in yours as well. But here's some of Dr. Cialdini's books. So if you haven't read them, make sure you check them out. Influence, the Science and Practice. Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. Yes, 50 Scientific Proven Ways to Be Persuasive. And his latest New York Times bestselling book, The Small Big, all of which are fantastic. But in case you haven't guessed it, he is the gold standard when it comes to persuasion and the ethical influence process. Okay, but what did he do that was so different, right, than other people that have talked about influence and whatnot in the past? Well, one of the things he did was he took all the past research to date in the psychology field on influence and persuasion. We're talking like stuff back from the Nazi Germany days and how they influenced people back then. Okay, and he took that data and he did something unique with it, right? He didn't just study it just to look for patterns about what had happened in the past. He decided to get out of the research field, if you will, out of the academic field and step out into the real world and start joining all kinds of sales trainings that he could get his hands on. So anybody that would hire him to be a sales consultant or had a sales training, he tried to get in there and study what they do and what their sales training was all about. So he did everything from being the Olin Mills photography guy, if you are old enough to know what that is. He sold vacuum cleaners door to door. He sold Amway. He sold new cars. He sold used cars. He worked in high-end ad agencies in New York and LA. And he also interviewed cult church leaders to see how they influenced their congregations. Okay? And what he did was he studied for patterns. He wanted to see if there's any of these universal principles that all of these teachings were using. And what he found was there were actually 6 key things that they were all using to influence more people to say yes. And that was the basis of his research for his book, Influence, the Science and Practice. Again, voted one of the top 100 business books of all time in sales and marketing. Okay. So what are these key 6 principles that he found, these 6 patterns that kept showing up in all these trainings? Well, the first one is called reciprocity, which a lot of us have heard of this term, right? Somebody gives us a gift of value, we feel the need to give back. Liking principle. What do we mean by liking? Well, we like to do business with people we like. It's as simple as that. Consensus or social proof, meaning in the absence of understanding what to do sometimes in a situation, we look to others' behavior to show us what we should be doing in that situation. That's social proof. The authority principle. What does the authority principle mean? Well, that means sometimes in the absence of understanding what to do in a situation, we look for other credible authorities to tell us what we should be doing in that situation. Consistency. Consistency is an important one. It's probably the #1 thing I see that we fail at in dentistry every day. And it's one of the biggest reasons behind most of the problems in our dental practice. And what consistency, I want you to think of commitments. Okay? So with consistency, it means this, that if people make a commitment on something, when they take a public stand on an issue or whatever that is, right, there's a lot of external and internal pressure on them to stay consistent with that stand that they made or that commitment they made to follow through with it. And if you can understand what that means, then you know why it's such a big problem in dentistry, right? We don't get enough commitments out of our patients. And we wonder why they no-show on us. You know, they don't show up for their appointments. They don't pay their bill on time. They don't schedule their treatment, and they don't refer anyone. Last but not least is the scarcity principle, right? Which means when resources are scarce, suddenly we want it more, and we'll pay more to get it. And the amazing thing about these principles is I call them subtly simple, right? They don't seem like hard concepts on the surface, but they're so powerful and around us every day, and very few people recognize them or know how to use those power to set the stage for more people to say yes to the request we ask of them. So one of the things I love about this is, as we said, is based in science, is because these principles are universal and they are cross-cultural, which means it doesn't matter where you're at, what country you're at, what society you grew up in, etc. These principles are present and apply. You know, I was just down in Australia this October speaking to a bunch of dentists down there for over 4 days and talking about these principles of influence, the same as I'm talking to you about them today, because it doesn't matter where you're from. The other thing I want you to know is there are some ethical ways you can use these principles, as I said, to get more people to say yes to the things we need them to say yes to. Now, sure, can they be used unethically? Of course, anything can. But what I'm going to teach you is an ethical way to use these things so you feel good about it, not as in a sleazy sales technique, if you will, but in an ethical way that it's a net win-win for both you and your patient as a result. So why are these principles so powerful, right? Why are they so subtly simple yet so powerful? Well, the reason is, I don't know if you realize this or not, but we're bombarded with over 1 million marketing messages a year. And with the way technology is going, I think it's probably going to double this coming year in 2016. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means we're bombarded with over 3,000 marketing messages a day, right? I mean, just imagine that for a second. Now picture how many decisions do you have to make on a daily basis, right? 100, 1,000, 2,000? And that's just at work, right? It doesn't even count the ones you got to make when you get home and you're tired. So we're bombarded with data just all day long, and it's almost like sensory overload for our brain. So as a result, our brain has had to do something to protect itself from all this data, from overload. And what it's done is it's created a process that scientists call satisficing. And so what our brain is looking for is it's looking for the first sufficiently satisfactory solution or decision to a problem. And it only has 2 criteria for this decision or solution. It's got to be a good decision or solution, and then it's got to be gone, meaning we're never going to have to deal with this again, or we're not going to have to circle back around and deal with it. And as a result, our brain has decided and created these little decision triggers, which are single reliable pieces of information that guide our decisions for us and help act almost like little shortcuts, if you will, to a yes or to a decision. And so that's what I want you to think about these principles. These are 6 little shortcuts that, if you will, that will set the stage for more people to say yes to what you're going to talk about. And if you think about that data and how much we're bombarded, I read a study recently that said that 90% of our day whether you realize it or not, our brain is on automatic pilot. So less than 10% of the time is thought, reason, or our personality and emotions helping to make our decisions, right? A lot of it's just automatic and under the radar. And so if you can imagine that 90% of your day is like that, you'll see how powerful these little shortcuts to yes can be. But as I mentioned earlier, are these a guarantee of a yes? Right? Just because if one of the principles is present in a situation, or maybe if all six are present in a situation and I engage them to my benefit, does that guarantee that this person's going to say yes to me? And the answer is no, right? They're not guarantees to a yes because, as I said, 10% of the time the brain is awake and can make a decision one way or the other. All I'm telling you is that if these principles are present, if you recognize them and understand how to use them, what I can guarantee you is that you're setting the stage for more yeses, and that if you use them, more people will say yes to the questions you ask of them than if you don't. That much I can guarantee. So what's an example of these shortcuts or decision triggers, right? Well, a lot of us have heard of Walmart and the everyday low price. You know, Walmart kind of built their name off of this concept, this logo, if you will. And what that means is if you go to a Walmart and see that an item says it's the everyday low price, they've done the research, and if you go to any other store in the country, you cannot get that product any cheaper except here. And guess what? It's their everyday low price. So to test this concept of shortcuts and decision triggers, if you will, they did a study where they went into a store and they picked two randomly selected items, and they put that everyday low price sticker, if you will, this logo, over each of those items. But the funny thing was they didn't change the price.